As I was thinking about today, and I was thinking about a lot of things we're trying to accomplish with Techfiesta here, one of the things became immediately apparent to me. There's a lot of great people talking. There's a lot of great people talking about what value creation looks like, about what companies do, what it means to be a part of companies. And I realized pretty quickly that what we were missing was backing up a step in that equation and figuring out where that whole mess begins in terms of that idea, in terms of that talent, and what fosters into that startup there. So as I was putting together my talk, I was thinking a lot about that, thinking about the casual nature about how that process kind of evolves. And I have to apologize up front. I gave a talk in front of a few thousand people here several weeks ago, and it didn't stop me from swearing, as I often do, so it's probably going to be a real mess today. So I want to introduce you to Charity Water. Charity Water is an incredible nonprofit. For those of you who don't know who they are, their mission in the world is to provide clean water and access to water in parts of the world where you don't really have a lot of that. Parts of rural Africa, parts of rural North America. But they did something pretty interesting, and I think it's pertinent here for us. What they did was they fundamentally re-envisioned a model that was either too slow or too broken for what they're doing. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today kind of comes to mind with Charity Water here. This is a charity that decided that you should be able to track every single dollar that goes through it. They should be held publicly and financially accountable for what they're doing. And if they're going to put wells around the world to pump water, those wells had better have GPS coordinates on them. They better have real-time updates about whether or not they're working, because people wanted to know what's going on. This was the first nonprofit to actually bring for-profit kind of ideas to the fold, and what they initially did was flourish because of that. So as we kind of go through today, that's what I want to keep in mind, is what is that moment where you're reimagining what's going on. So on the theme of bringing that back, on the theme of bringing it back to what we're doing today, I wanted to take a moment and really assess where those ideas come from, where the talent comes from, that decision process. And it really comes down to something like this. Innovation is where this community really is at the moment. We are starting things, we are trying new things, we are experimenting with how we're funding new companies and what those companies mean to the environment. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about how we get there. Because if we don't talk about how we get there, we're not going to get there repeatedly or over and over and over as we go. So one of the things I want to talk about is just breaking this down from an idea of what are those ideas, what do they mean to us, where do they go, what is that talent, how do we cultivate it, what does that talent mean in terms of where it lives and what that means, as it just all feeds into an innovation form. So we'll start with the idea piece of it. I think this is a pretty interesting definition. It's a pretty shitty definition too of what an actual idea is. But an idea is where this all starts. It's that spark. And one of the things that I think this fails to capture, even though this is technically what Merriam-Webster tells me an idea is it fails to capture the impetus behind that. An idea is the formation of some kind of action. It is that opportunity to move forward and to bring that idea forward. So everyone from Plato all the way to some of our biggest corporate leaders like the Jack Welch's of the world, look at that formation of the idea as the moment when you step forward. It's the moment that you kind of move forward and take on a new challenge. And as I was thinking about the idea, one of the things that came to mind, there's this really amazing quote that is attributed to Henry Ford, but if you do your homework, it turns out it's actually not anything he ever said. He was talking about the idea of the car and thinking about what that car meant to people, and he said, well, I needed that idea, and that inspiration came to me and me alone, and I didn't look out into the world to ask for input on that, because it was the idea, it was the seed, it was that kernel. And the reason I didn't look out in the world is because if I asked people what they really wanted, they just would have said a faster horse. And when people say that, they are speaking truthfully, but he was looking at something grander. He was looking at an idea that really transcended that. So that's the concept of the idea. Now where's that coming from for us? Well, let's make that real for what we're doing here. If you look into the research, it's really quite interesting. 76% of every idea you've ever had came to you in a spontaneous moment. So thank God I showered this morning, I solved 100 world problems. It's that spontaneous moment. It's the walking the dog. It's the hanging out with your friends. It's thinking about something completely unrelated that sparks that moment. That's 76. Pretty much the remainder of that percentage there, where those ideas come from, are the really hard-fought ideas. Those are the ideas that are really difficult. You pound the pavement, you stay up all night, and you force yourself into that conclusion. And it's really interesting to think about that really not a lot happens in between those two spots. And as you think about this, there's great examples, and I don't know how many people are familiar with Uber, which is a tremendous company that has pretty much changed the idea of how we ride in cars and how we call chauffeured services. And it's the perfect idea of what that spontaneous moment looks like for them. Travis Kalanick is the CEO, and I had the fortune of talking with him recently about that. He told this tremendous story about the inspiration, about that inspiration of that idea. And Travis started his life in the music industry. Think Napster, think before I download songs on iTunes. And part of the danger of being in the music industry before that is his spectacular exit for his music startup was being sued for $500 million. And he was leaving a restaurant one day, and he was with his lawyers, and he literally had just signed the paperwork and realized that he was going to have every dollar he'd ever made for the rest of his life garnished. And he was standing on the corner, and he said, I've got nothing left. I really just wish I'd had a car roll up that would make me feel like a baller. And I walk out onto the curb, and this thing pulls up right in front of me, and it's a nice sedan. And that was when Uber was born. And it wasn't born because he was trying to solve the problem. It was born because he was having a moment distraction. He was having a moment where that impetus could just naturally bubble up. The flip side of that is some of the work that's being done down in Sandia. I was talking with a couple individuals down there that are doing the most amazing thing for miniaturizing photovoltaic cells. I don't know that you wake up in the morning and go, my God, they must be smaller. I think instead what you do, and this is kind of how it panned out over the course of our conversation, what he said was, we knew it needed to be smaller. That was never in question. So we stayed up nights. We stayed in front of whiteboards. We walked out of conference rooms where the floor was littered with crumpled up paper, and eventually we got to the point where we could make this thing smaller. And I like those two stories because in my mind they really crystallized the idea that this impetus, this idea that's kind of bubbling up for any startup, including the ones in our community, really come from those kinds of places. So that's the source. How about the idea itself? The idea itself, and this is something that I think was really pertinent to our community, the idea itself is, what's big enough? Well, what's the big enough idea? Because I think around here we think kind of big, but we really need to be thinking a lot bigger. There's a virtue to an incremental step. An incremental step is easy. An incremental step is worthwhile. It's easy to identify. But an incremental step is just that. It's an incremental step. There's a lot more going on when you can do something huge. You can do something that's really important for the environment. And, I was thinking about Elon Musk and doing the Hyperloop that is going to travel up and down the California coast there. It's an unbelievable idea. It's effectively putting human beings inside of a bullet and shooting it from San Francisco to Los Angeles. I don't really know how I feel about that. But the point is that he is reimagining the idea of transporting people, and he's thinking about it not in terms of building a slightly faster horse or a slightly faster car. He's thinking about it in fundamentally transforming what we do as people when we're moving around. And there's ideas of plenty to do that, and I would encourage, as we're thinking about those ideas, especially the communities that we're a part of, to think about ideas that have that kind of impact. Because the reality is, every idea you have is going to pivot. Every idea you have is going to change. It's going to move a little bit on you. And if you start with something incremental, that change is just going to make it smaller. Start with something large. When we were launching a travel business for Living Social, which was a really exciting time because when you launch a travel business, I don't know how many people know this, they fly you everywhere for free. It's amazing. But we were looking for experiences around the world, and we were looking for experiences we could sell people to run like anything else. And we came up really quite frustrated because you can do tours in the city, you can take a flight to somewhere unusual, you can do a lot of these things. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to do something truly unique. So we actually went and sat down with the Chinese government and structured a deal where we could now sell to our customers domestically a 4-course meal on the Great Wall. And it was an amazing experience for people, and it really just took us thinking outside that box of what that structured idea really is. So as we're thinking about it, as a community, as this room comes together, and as individuals outside of this room are working, don't limit yourself. That limitation is going to be really challenging as we move forward. I had a great experience. I actually see David Abel there. I had a great experience sitting down with these guys the other night, and we didn't do anything big and bad. We had some beers. We talked about cool ideas. And that's the kind of thing that really resonates with a community, that builds that kind of traction. It doesn't have to be your idea, but just ideas. And what you'll find is if you are walking through coffee shops and if you're attending conferences in the Bay Area, in New York, and in Boston, these areas, that kind of interaction is happening every single night. That kind of interaction is happening so frequently, it's hard to find when it's not happening. And one of the things that I think would help this community step onto that global stage is to engender those kinds of ideas of, we need to be spurring this. So what you're competing against in those Bay Area, they're not great ideas, but there's a lot of them. So you've got two problems. They're spinning off a lot of ideas. And the other thing is, you've got a whole culture of individuals that have now sat down and become professional idea makers. They spin them off without thinking about it. And that's happening. Everyone in this room I've had a chance to interact with to some extent or know of, and that's happening in this room. And the challenge is to make it happen outside of this room. The challenge is to make that a little bit bigger. So that's the idea piece of this, and that's how we're kind of thinking about the idea and what that idea means to building that impetus. But the idea is only the first step. We need to add to that some level of talent, and the talent in this environment is amazing. It's absolutely amazing, but there's a lot of infrastructure around that becomes kind of a challenge point. I don't know what possessed me to start sections with actual definitions, but this one's also fairly terrible. This is what the dictionary would suggest to you that talent is, and the reason I hate this, and I hate this for a very specific reason, is it suggests to me that you're either born or you're not born with talent. And I know Belinda is probably going to rush the stage and try to kill me when I say this, because I know she disagrees with me. But the reality is talent is built. You have, of course, certain things you're born with. You know, I was born with terrible vision, and that's just something I get to live with. But talent's built. It's a responsibility of that individual, and it's a responsibility to grow that talent within yourself. And what that means is you kind of look at it is you need to have some kind of practice. You need to have some kind of want. And there isn't an innate quality here as much as Belinda would make you believe. But really what it is it's a willingness. It's really a willingness to do something better, to do something more. And I haven't encountered a single individual in this community, certainly not in the state and not up and down the coast, that was really that unicorn, was really that one person that you couldn't imagine they wouldn't succeed. What I encountered a lot of was simply people that just wanted it more. They just wanted it more than their neighbor. They wanted it harder, and they wanted it faster, and they wanted it sooner than the person around them. And what that created was an opportunity for them to be better. Because then they started doing things. They started doing things that were tremendous. They started actually practicing more. They started actually doing more things. And you know, I see Sean McCracken out there. Sorry, but I'm going to totally out you right now. Sean is face down on his laptop right now with his Google Glass on. I think he's only sort of aware of the fact that I'm even up here right now. But Sean, in my mind, is a perfect example of that. Sean was not born understanding development for Google Glass. That never happened. What he did was learn how to do it, and that makes him somewhat unique. But what makes him really unique is the fact that he wanted to do it better than anyone else. And then what you've got is you've got the first game that ever hit Google Glass. And you've got someone that's developing stuff for it that's never happened before. And the reason it is partially because Sean's a smart guy, and it's partially because he's a nice guy to work with and all those things. But the truth of the matter is, every time I've sat down with him, he just wanted it more. He just wanted it more than anyone else. And that's what makes Sean the heads down in his laptop guy that I see today. So as we think about that talent, who are they? Like, what are the things they're doing? What are the things they're doing? They're doing a lot of things. So first and foremost, they are practicing more than anyone else. They are pushing harder, and they are practicing more than anyone else. And what that means is it comes in lots of different forms. That practice isn't just doing your job, but that practice is, you know, me being unable to not completely derail the night of the individual bringing me my beer at Marble because I can't shut up about some startup idea I have. It becomes that constant lifestyle. They're practicing all the time. That's the talent, that's the leadership that are doing that. They are looking for value creation. And there's a really big distinction here that I would challenge everyone to think about. We get locked in that mindset, certainly in New Mexico a little bit, that value creation is tied specifically to dollars. And yeah, I get it. We all want to be rich. I want to be rich. I really do. But at the same time, value creation is how you get there, not by focusing on those individual dollars. So real talent, as I'm looking around the room, and I certainly see a lot of it, but as I look around the state where they kind of lose their focus a little bit, is the idea that by focusing on collecting $1, they're going to make $1. And what they miss out is the opportunity to change something. They miss out on the opportunity to do something great, to impact people's lives, to make people better, to make them faster, to do something important. And then the rest of it comes. And by focusing on those kinds of things, you actually have something that matters, you have something that's meaningful. They love new ways of doing things, they love to embrace each other, they love to try new things. I look around the room and there's a number of individuals here who are very well steeped in our investment community. And I have a little bit of the same problem they do, of course not to the same extent of you walk in somewhere and you get a business plan. And it's great, it's really neat because they're trying new things. There's an individual, an entrepreneur out there that can't wait to try something new. So while you end up with a stack of business plans, and that's kind of interesting, and there's always some gem in there, which is really great, I got to tell you, I just get inspired by the fact that people are trying. And I think we need to try more. I think there shouldn't be one business plan floating around a room like this. There should be 15. And I know that Ray is probably going to try to kill me because he does not want to hear that, because he doesn't want to have to sift through all the paperwork. But the reality is, that's what we need. We need to be able to have a community that is looking to push these kinds of things forward with such speed that you can't walk into a room without someone asking your opinion about it. They love collaborating. Collaboration is the key. There's a lot of opportunity when you actually remember the fact that you're not the smartest guy in the room, because I would actually challenge anyone who does think they're the smartest guy in the room. They have this collaboration bent to them that is really important. And there's lots of other things. They're always looking for challenges. But this is what talent becomes. This is how you grow that talent. This is how you look at talent and think about what it means. I think that there's probably a pretty interesting exercise around what talent isn't as well. Talent, there's a lot of things that talent can't be. I'm going to steal this, or I know Jessica Matthews isn't here today. I'm going to steal this from her a little bit. But talent isn't cowboy entrepreneurship. It isn't the individual idea that you can take this thing all the way yourself. I don't need any help. I know everything I'm doing. The problem with that is, I can challenge you already. I'm not singling myself out either. I don't either. Like there is no hope for me if I try to go alone. And in doing so, the only thing I'm doing is destroying the value of the thing that I truly prize. So as you think about it, like that becomes a really big hindrance to what you're doing. And one of the things that, as a culture, we are certainly directionally correct. We're moving out of this environment, but there's always that opportunity to ask yourself, with this decision, did I act like a cowboy? With this decision, was I the cowboy that destroyed some value, that made this not a collaborative activity? And I'm not suggesting that we're doing that every day, but I am suggesting that people fall back into that. I fall back into that sometimes. And I would challenge you to remember not to be doing those things. Dollar focused, it's just the opposite of the value there. We can't be thinking about the dollars. The dollars come, you need to create something great. It's not the one-man show, and incidentally, I'm also pretty sure that true talent doesn't hold a gun in meetings. But what does this mean? Like, let's make this a little bit more tangible. So as you look at a lot of the great research that's coming out, I'm excited about this research because it came out of my alma mater, but as you look at some of this great research that's coming out, and it's been cited in HBR, and they actually did a study with the Google team. They took the Google leadership team, and they put them in a room, and they talked to them about all the businesses that the venture group there is working with, and they talked to them about all the opportunities they see and that fail. The ones that never go anywhere a year after they've started, and what is the common theme moving throughout there? And what they found was, over half of those, it was simply because there was some kind of focused leadership that really couldn't figure out how to do everything themselves when that's what they wanted. So there was that cowboy problem. That cowboy problem going forward. There was, too much focus on the money, too much focus on being the one-man show. There's some of the other things in there, and I have no idea what the question mark is for how many of those businesses failed because somebody brought a gun. So that's the talent. That's the talent piece of what we're doing. Those are the individuals. Now, I want us to think about that, especially as we go throughout the rest of the day. And I was very deliberate in starting very upstream in the value creation process here, because we're going to spend a lot of time today with, quite frankly, individuals much smarter than myself talking about what it means to have a business. How do you value a business? How do you look at a business? How do you bring a community? All these different pieces. And I wanted us to not forget, as we went through that day, what's making those individual pieces, what's making those companies, and what's starting at the beginning, with the beginning piece. So where does this live? This is a community-based idea, no matter how you slice it. It's absolutely a community-based idea, no matter how you slice it. And one of the things that becomes really challenging is that definition of community. And I know that as I'm talking with individuals, there's a real focus on Albuquerque. We even have a Techfiesta that we're all here for today that is called the Albuquerque Tech Rev, Albuquerque Techfiesta, and that's great because within this room is such tremendous talent, and we're going to help each other get there. But one of the things we can't forget, though, is our definition of community needs to broaden a bit. We have the virtue, and I look at a lot of the individuals I see here today, and a lot of the products they're building and companies they're making. We have the ability here to redefine what that community means and to really broaden it out. And I would argue that actually community has nothing to do with geography whatsoever. When we're reaching out to do different things, we're not reaching down the street. We do it because it's easy. We don't do it because it's the right move. We're kind of isolating ourselves a little bit. One of the biggest challenge points I see for us kind of going forward is figuring out how to grow that community, make it a bigger piece, make it something that not only the talent here can exist in, but the talent elsewhere can really be a part of. And as I think about what that community piece is, that's one barrier that needs to come down, is the idea that New Mexico stands by itself. New Mexico doesn't stand by itself. As soon as you have any product, it goes out in the world. I know this myself because we're signing clients each day, which is exactly the kind of business problems I want. But at the same time, these clients are everywhere. They're everywhere. I need to make them feel like they're right next to me when they're in fact not, and it breaks down those barriers pretty quickly. So that's one piece of it. The other is who drives that community. And as you think about the community itself, as you think about who's driving it, there's always a couple of main players in the community. You can loosely define it as those that organize the community and those that provide some level of infrastructure for that community, and those that exist within the community. And there's some overlap there. But it's funny when I ask a room, who's actually doing the driving? Who's doing the driving? Is it community organization? Is it civic programs? Is it state programs? Is it federal government, like Scott Case's Startup America program? Or is it the entrepreneurs? I pretty much get half and half. Every one of the community organizers, civic organizers say, well, we're driving policy and we're creating an environment for what's going on. And the entrepreneurs say, I'm creating products, I'm creating companies, I'm creating what's going forward here. And I would posit right now that the reality is, neither one of those things is true. Neither one of those things is true in terms of one actually leading. What they need to be doing is be locked in a fierce arms race, constantly. Because they push one another. And I want that to sound friendly. I'm sorry, I used arms race, it's probably not the right term. I want that to sound friendly, but the reality is they need to push one another. And there's great examples of us doing that here that become really pertinent. As you look at, Mayor Berry has the City Labs project for helping kids really expose themselves to architecture and what that architecture means to the community. It was a direct recognition of the fact that these kids weren't getting what they need, and there wasn't a program around there to support them. And now what you've got is kids playing with these architecture models and building and experimenting and thinking about the city in ways they never have before. The civic programs, the community organizers were frustrated and outpaced the entrepreneurs that were trying to solve that problem too. And that's great. That's great. They're keeping them honest. They're making sure they're pushing. Now, likewise, the flip side of that coin is very true as well. Crimson Curriculum, for those of you who remember from Startup Weekend, won first place. I don't know if Taylor's here today. I always think of her. She's that one unicorn, by the way. In terms of talent, I'm sure she's going to be an utter force to be dealt with, and she will figure out in some way to cultivate an amazing experience somewhere. But if you ever have the chance, put her on the spot a little bit. What comes out of her mouth is, it's definitely a little unseasoned, all those things, but God, it's just downright brilliant. It just is. She's kind of amazing. But as you think about Crimson Curriculum, they represent the flip side of that coin. They're the flip side of that coin in terms of what the entrepreneurs recognized was a missing piece of civic activity, of state-sponsored activity, of curriculum, of something, and they pushed past them. They developed a way to educate students and give them toys, effectively, to learn engineering concepts. And it's simple, and it's approachable, and it's easy, and every single kid that they put this in the hands of is killing it. They are more well-versed than myself, certainly, in any engineering concept now, and they are very young, and all they did was play with toys, and that's incredible. So they recognized that now it was their turn. It was their turn to stand up and really push this community forward and keep the civic organizing groups very honest in what they're doing. And I think they represent a very interesting example, but I would also challenge everyone out here to recognize that arms race, as friendly as it's supposed to be, is supposed to be. It's not supposed to have any challenges there that keep them from pushing one another. And as I look around the entrepreneurship community, one of the things that I want to see is the entrepreneurship community to stand up and keep pushing back. Not because we're a bunch of jerks, and not because Eric and his team are doing anything wrong. In fact, I really like a lot of the things they are doing, but because I want to keep Eric honest, and I want to keep him pushing, and I want to keep him fighting, and I want him to do the same damn thing to me. And the only way we can do that is as entrepreneurs, as startup individuals, as small business owners, is if we stand up a little bit and push a little harder and a little faster. And that's one of the things that really becomes relevant here as we start thinking about that community. We talked about the time, we talked about the talent, the ideas, all these different pieces. Let's make this relevant now for New Mexico a little bit. Brad Feld is an incredible author. I don't know if any of you have read any of his work. He does kind of pseudo pop culture literature, think Freakonomics kind of thing. There's real data and real analysis, but it's actually, it doesn't put you to sleep when you read it. And really, through a lot of his research, tapping into Harvard research studies, looking at Fortune 500 companies, one of the things they realized very quickly was there's a thematic kind of idea behind what drives that community and what puts them forward in terms of those individual important points. And really what it comes down to is in my mind, this really could have just been 2 points. Entrepreneurs being leaders and thinking long term. There needs to be that kind of push of entrepreneurs to stand up and take control of their community and to figure out what it takes to think and solve problems in a big way. The other side of that equation is thinking about the inclusive nature of it. This was thinking about breaking down those barriers, thinking about taking opportunity into our own hands and creating activity that drives that. So as he kind of put this research together, I felt this was very pertinent for Albuquerque in particular, because what happens here is the opportunity to really exploit these. The opportunity for us to stand up, the opportunity for us to break down barriers. And I look around the room here, bar none. This is just actually a list. If you can't read it, that's fine. It's meant to be kind of small, but this is actually just a list of all the people talking at the Tech Rev today. These are all people on a panel, they're moderating, they're doing something, and they're going to be up here today. That's an incredible list. That's a lot of people that chose to stand up and take a lead at something. It's also the majority of the people in this room right now. So I think there's also an opportunity for us to think about engaging that community a little bit more realistically, because I do love you all very genuinely, but we've also had these conversations before. We've talked about what it means to stand up as a community and drive that forward. So I like this list. I like this list because it's people that are proactive and they're looking to do something really, truly important, and they're looking to lead long term, which is also important. And how about the other side of that equation? As you think about what breaks down those barriers and what makes it really important for us to recognize that Albuquerque transcends what's on the other side of the Sandia Mountains. That becomes a really important thing, and activity is the key for these individual pieces. And as I look at this, one of the things I had to ask myself is I've been really fortunate since I've been here, and it's only been like 5 months, to be part of Startup Weekend and to be part of pitch contests and to be part of all these different things that are really energizing and really exciting to see. And I asked this question because I don't have an answer. When was the last time that we hosted something and we sent an invitation further than the state? I missed it. I don't know if there was one. And if there is, I apologize. But I think there's a real opportunity to treat ourselves as a focal point and not as an insular community in that respect. So I think about that, and I think about what it means to actually reach out there. I would love to see a pitch competition where we reach out and invite companies in New York. Now the reality is, very few will make it. Who's going to hop on a plane? But at the same time, a couple will, and it's worth it. And it's absolutely worth it. We're starting to think about that. And I was kind of having some fun with this slide, and I have to admit I made this slide very late at night. And actually I'm really pleased that Ray stepped out of the room because I put him on the hook for something. I would love to see Cottonwood sponsor a launch competition, and I want that to actually come with invitations that transcend this state, transcend this community, because what we do is too great. We do have that talent. I've never come off of that point. I think we need to hone it. We do have the ideas. I don't come off of that point, but it just needs to be bigger. How we do that is we bring in people to help keep us honest. The same way Eric's going to keep me honest when I'm pushing new businesses forward, and I'm going to try to keep him honest. But I want to see this kind of thing. I want to see some launch competition. I want to see some kind of activity that's going to really push and drive people forward, because that becomes really relevant. So we've talked about the idea, and we've talked about the talent. And there's one missing component there that's really interesting, and that's that decision point. And I think that's more often than not where most people get hung up, and it's certainly where we get hung up here a little bit, is I may have the idea and I may have the talent, but God, should I do it? Is it the right time? Is it the right way? Is it the right thing? And and Jeff is down here smiling at me, and I know he's going to have a talk later today that I'm excited for that's going to dive pretty deep into this. But what is that decision moment? What is that moment where you think about going? And so naturally, the only thing I could think to kind of elaborate on this point is thinking about what do we want to be as a community? If we want to be as a community a place where companies can exist and companies can do their thing and just kind of grow, that's one answer. If we want to be a place that creates value in these companies and spurs them out into the world, that's another. Now, I would argue that those are not mutually exclusive. They can be the same. But there is a conscious decision there. There's a conscious decision around whether or not we want to be a community that is startup and value creation focused, or we're lifestyle focused. Those are both fair. They are. But that decision has to happen. So naturally, to talk about that, I'm going to talk about fishing. I don't know how many of you have heard, there's this really famous parable that they often tell a lot of MBA students when you go to school, and I think it's actually meant to make you drop out, believe it or not. And it's the idea of this really, really influential, very successful, very wealthy businessman goes on vacation, and he goes down to some tropical paradise, and he goes down there and he rents a boat, and this guy to take him out fishing, and they're sitting out on this boat, and the businessman asks him, he says, well, what do you do? And he goes, well, I fish a couple hours a day. I go home, I hang out with my wife, I play with my kids, I read my book. And the businessman looks at him and goes, oh my God, you're killing me. What are you doing? You need to create value. You need 5 boats. You need to have 5 boats. You need to be running them all day out here. And the fisherman looks at him and says, all right, okay, well then what? And the businessman says, well, then we get 100 boats, and then we start selling your fish. We start selling it around the region. Okay, then what? Then we get thousands of boats. You just became a fish dispensary. We're selling them in grocery stores around the world. You're taking over the market. You're running the company. You're CEO. And the fisherman says, okay, fine. Well, then what? And the businessman looks at him and says, then you come back here. You fish for a couple hours because you love it. You hang out with your wife. You play with your kids. And you read your book. And the fisherman looks and says, I'm doing that right now. Now, I don't think that was meant to make anyone drop out, but we did actually lose someone in my class after that story was told on day one. That was kind of embarrassing. But when you think about that, I want to be very upfront that there's no wrong answer in that story. The fisherman's right. The fisherman's right that he can do that the rest of his life and be happy. And the businessman's right that creating value, creating the ancillary benefits of all these jobs and value creation are right. But where I think that story misses is the fact that you can't do both. You can't do both. You're not allowed to fish for 2 hours a day and take a nap on the beach if what you want to do is take over all of international fish distribution. It's not going to happen. So that's the decision. That's one of the moments that I think we as a community need to think about what that means and where it takes us going forward is, what do we wish to be when we grow up? Because we are growing. I love the direction that we are growing. It is correct. It is moving in the right direction. But we haven't sat down as a group, and I would even encourage us to do that today. If you can find a moment, grab a few people, pull them to the side, and say, what are we growing into? What is our intent with a lot of this? Is our intent to create value? Is our intent to create a lifestyle? What do we want to do? So as we think about that decision, that's the idea of what we want to be. There's a moment when we need to make that decision, though. There's a tipping point that becomes really relevant. And I've had this conversation a couple of times with folks here, and I've had it for years and years and years, but what that relevant moment is when you finally make that decision, there's really a tipping point. There's a tipping point, and I'll pick on myself, for example. It's when the idea of doing something great, my hunger, my greed for that overtakes my fear for it. Because that fear is what holds us back, and that greed is what makes us big. And I don't want to be misconstrued by saying, greed was awesome, it's amazing. No, I'm not talking about money. I'm just not. I could do what I'm doing and not make a lot of money and be happy the rest of my life, quite frankly. But what I'm talking about is doing something. That hunger that you can't shut you down in terms of making you move forward. And so it's that moment when you have some level of fear, some level, thank you. I think every business school professor I've ever had has literally tried to throw me out of a window for how casual my slide decks are, and yet at the same time I keep having luck with funding and presentations. So, but it's that moment. It's that moment when you have fear. You're scared to death. You're supposed to be scared. That means you're doing something right, but it is scary. It's that moment that changes. That changes because what you've got is you've got greed. The greed of doing something right. You didn't think I could go cuter, but I went cuter, right? I think I did. It's one of those moments where the greed actually overtakes, and that's when you have a decision. That's when all of those ideas, that's when all of that talent, that's when everything that we've tried to build here together comes together, and we're moving. And so I don't want to belittle the point, and I certainly don't want to make it insincere by putting up adorable pictures of God knows whose babies those are. But I think the point is valid. I think the point is very valid that we need to think about that as a group, make the decision of what we're deciding and do it. And going forward. So the last thing I wanted to just touch on very, very briefly here is we've kind of walked that spectrum now. We've walked that spectrum of we're going to go into these great talks later today, and we're going to pick up on dialogue around what makes a meaningful business. We're going to be talking about what makes value, what makes a community, all these different things. And I hope that to some extent I've set the stage around what happens before that. Is it that idea, is it that talent, that decision that all come together? But we have one last obligation. And that last obligation is to keep it moving. And we need to keep it moving. And I actually promise you this is the only place in my entire talk, and we are coming to the end, where I use smart art. The only place. But as we cultivate innovation here, as we start thinking about that, there needs to be that moment where we bring all that together. And there's a very cyclical nature to that of figuring out what now we want to do. We've innovated. Here together in this room. We figured out the idea, the talent, decision. We've innovated. Now, what? Test that hypothesis, focus around that idea that we're doing, create those stretch goals, find the resources, remove those barriers, and then fail fast. I have a love-hate relationship with this phrase, fail fast. I hate it because Zuckerberg stole it. He stole it from another startup, and I think that's not a very good play. But at the same time, it's meaningful. If you're going to make a decision, make it, and figure out how to move forward with it, and then when it doesn't work out, find that next decision point. One of the challenges, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, that I think we need to really think about is that moment of failing fast. Where do we as a community say, hey, we need to cut losses here, we need to reallocate resources here and move forward so that we collectively make the right kind of innovative growth going forward. So as we think about that, this becomes really relevant. This is up on a wall in a lot of different companies that I've worked with, just because we're trying to get them to espouse the idea that they do need to kind of live throughout that value chain. And one of the things I wanted to leave here today before I'm done talking is I wanted to make this room do it too. I'm not gonna make you stand up or anything like that, so don't worry. One of the things I think is really missing is that opportunity for those big ideas and for people to come around that idea and make it something pretty grand. So I want to leave a challenge here, and I really hope that a number of people take me up on this. But one of the things I want to do today is I want you to do this. I want you to think about the talks you're going to today. I want you to really internalize those ideas. I want you to think about an idea. I want you to think about the right talent, all of these different pieces, and then do something with that. With these kinds of things in mind, tweet me by 5 o'clock today, a big idea, and who you're doing it with. And what I'm going to offer you in exchange for that is I'm going to take a dose of my own medicine. I espouse over and over again how we're not helping each other, that we should take a vested interest. I mean, I don't know if Randy from Rock Tops is here, but I should spend an hour with him talking about his business. Not because I'm charging him, not because I'm doing anything grand, but because if somebody around here wins, we all win. And so I'm going to take a dose of my own medicine and say, if you got a great idea and we find out what it is, you're getting collaboration. You're not just getting mine. I will collaborate with you on figuring out what it is. Jeff Full, who's sitting in the audience here, I don't know how many of you know him, but he is arguably one of the best business consultants I have ever encountered, and he has a tremendous entrepreneur background. He's a real asset for this community and the greater community we've been talking about. Jessica Eves Matthews, who is not here because she's giving a talk, has donated an hour of her time. There is a number of people here that if you come up with something interesting, are excited to sit down with you for a couple of hours and see what happens. And just because that's the practice we need to be in, that is the thing we need to do together as a community, and that is what builds something else. That's what helps us step onto that next stage. So with that in mind, I've gotten a couple of extra minutes. I'm going to end it there, and I would love any questions, or even if we just need a bathroom break. But thank you very much for... questions or anything of that sort? Well, I was told I was introducing, oh yes, please.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you for coming out and what ideas. Sometimes I feel, representing the government side of things, that we hear a lot that the best thing government can do is just get out of the way. But the first people that come to for money is the government.
It's a real pain in the ass, isn't it?
So I guess I'd be interested today just hearing from people as you walk around, or if you find me or whatever, think about specific things that you think can be done where we can play a role, even if it is just get out of the way, or if there's something specific other than just give us money. So, and maybe we can do that too. So I welcome that.
Tell everyone who you are.
Oh, yeah, right, okay. My name is Deirdre Firth. I'm Manager of Economic Development Division for the City of Albuquerque.
Well, thank you. Deirdre, that's an interesting point, and I'd like to comment on that for a second if I could. Yeah, you hear everything in between we need the government, we need the programs, we need all these different things, the government should get out of the way, and I would maintain that that is a needed piece. It is absolutely a needed piece. It's just the context and the timing of that becomes relevant. I think of the labs as kind of a proxy for that a little bit. I've gotten a conversation just this morning talking about how everyone's frustrated. We don't get more technologies out of the labs. More technologies out of the labs. What are they doing? And the reality is they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. They're doing basic research, amazing basic research. And the next step in that chain is finding some driven entrepreneur who has that hunger to take that the next step. Now, if you have the conversation, PNL up Northwest fell into this trap in the 80s of deciding that they needed to do the whole thing. They needed to be commercializing, they needed to be doing the technology, all of this. And what they found was they were a tremendous basic research engine that became pretty mediocre because they were splitting their attention. And they were a pretty mediocre commercialization body because they were trying to do both. And they've since reverted and have gone back to the great lab that they are now. But I think that speaks to the idea that it's a value chain. It's a value chain from one end to the other, and it does start with some of this basic research. It starts with government programming. It starts with some of these things that really help out. But there is a necessity point where that transitions. So there's kind of that fluid moment there. I'm supposed to introduce, I think, the mayor's in the audience. Is he here today?
He's not here yet, so I have more questions.
Let's go, Lisa.
You've been here for a few months, and I'm
Yeah.
curious.
I still use my GPS to drive everywhere, yes.
There's the mountain that makes it easy.
You would think, yeah.
What is the one thing that excites you most about the Albuquerque community? What is the thing that you look at this and you say, this really excites me about being here?
I think the thing that excites me more than anything else is just the potential. There is an insane amount of talent around here. Part of it's because it's trickling out of the labs. Part of it's just because we got hungry-ass people like the ones sitting in this room. And I think where we're challenging ourselves a little bit is scratching the surface and bringing that up a little bit. But I love being here just because I can't throw a stick in a bar without finding somebody with an idea. They just don't know what to do with it. So it's that potential that's bubbling under the surface that it's electric. It really is, and we just need to figure out how to unleash it.
Right, the counterpoint to her question, what do you feel is the greatest hindrance in the Albuquerque community?
I think probably the biggest hindrance in the Albuquerque community right now is we assume that because we're trying to do it alone, that when you start a business, you do it alone. And I think that's one of the biggest missteps that we make. If you look, and there's tremendous examples up and down the coast, and I hate to fall into that stereotype of, yes, it's all happening out there, but they've had success. We can even point at the Boulders of the world, we can point to Chicago's and Seattle's. But they've had success, and one of the things they realized very, very rapidly is that success comes with a recognition that they need help. And that they need help from a management standpoint and a financing standpoint, and they need teams of people doing things. And we sometimes, in a lot of the companies I've talked with, especially the people in this room, are fixing this problem, they're actively working on it, but some of the new companies coming up are still locked in this mindset of, I'm gonna take over the world, I'm gonna make a mountain of money, and I'm gonna do it from my couch. And that's great. There's a unicorn out there that managed to do it somewhere, but the ones that do it repeatedly year after year are the ones that recognize they need help, and they do it collaboratively. So I think that's something we really struggle with, and we need to get a little bit better about, is the fact that I can't wait to talk to you about how to make my idea better. That simple moment is that moment where we've already done something great. Yes?
To fuel the revolution, you have to have talent. 90% of our talent leaves the state for lack of jobs. If you are a startup, if you're an established business, our organization puts engineering students into local tech companies, and we graduated a class of 80 kids, and everyone was offered a job. So don't look outside the state. Start employing the students that could be your next employee. Because you can't go to your companies if you constantly have to go to other places, you know, to get your staff.
Yeah, and that comes down to the help side of it. I mean, there's help here to be had. You know, Jeff, I was picking on you, I can't wait to hear what you have to say about my next idea, but the reality is I need help thinking about it. I need, Ray just walked back in, I need help financing it. I need students that are gonna come there and help me actually do it. And where I am going to stumble first and hardest is the second I forget that. Well, if there's no other questions, I guess, do we have anyone on the
I'll ask
Eric?
sort of a comment,
Sure.
not exactly the last question, but during the lunchtime today, we've got what's sort of phrased as a listening session. Not that you need that time, although you're going to be plenty busy in the different panels, but that might be a great time to take up this challenge with the people you're talking with. That's a great time. Also, if you've got passion around some kind of idea, you might seize a table and talk about how you're going to move that idea forward. I'll point to Deborah there. Deborah and Webb's web session. One of the things that they're talking about is, how do we move together this community around the independent, producers, entrepreneurs, and technologists. So there's a great opportunity to do that. And this is my way of stalling because we've got your guest in the hallway.
Oh, fantastic. And Eric, thanks for the reminder on that, though. Truly, I mean, we've got Jeff, we've got Jesse, we've got two of probably the most important and influential minds here. They're willing to donate their time, and then I'm going to latch onto that as well. So please come up with that idea, and we'd love to sit down and talk about it. So with that in mind, I guess we have a special guest coming in here. I'm stalling, Eric. I'm done. I don't know what you want me to do, man.
Dance.
All right.
Dance.
All right. I got no dance moves. Trust me. Nobody wants to see that. Eric, if we're out of time, I'm going to just say goodbye then.